Lady D. Be a guest on our show. 216-571-2222. Well, welcome to What's Going On with Lady D today, and I'm your host. Today we have a special guest in the house, no other than Mr. Darrell Scott Wright, with over 25 years in broadcasting, and he is now the voice behind Jazz Flight, a podcast celebrating jazz and jazz legends through his insightful interviews and storytelling. Darrell, welcome to the show. And let's just dive right on into your journey about Jazz Flight.
Okay.
What's going on?
A little as possible, trying to make the podcast work. It's growing. It's been a long journey. We are 18 months old.
Okay.
We probably have done 75, almost 80 shows. Currently, I've talked to Gerald Albright, Kirk Whalum, Carol Albert, Reagan Whiteside, Jeanette Harris, a whole bunch of people.
Yes.
And the names keep coming in. There's still a whole bunch of people that I want to get to. Marcus Miller, Bob James, Stanley Clark. But I think those days are coming.
They are coming. I see it in the stars.
Okay.
It's in your rising.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that. Need all the help we can get.
So now you've had an incredible 25 years, a career in radio.
Mm-hmm.
What inspired you to transition from broadcasting to creating Jazz Flight?
Well, let's say, I don't know about creating. I got
you
started.
are the creator of it.
Yeah, I got started way back in the 70s. That's when I started my radio career, I have to think. And for the most part, I was doing nothing but like weekends and fill-ins and stuff like that.
Okay.
So that wasn't necessarily enough to pay, let's say, the cable bill. So I went out and got a real job. I went to the corporate side of everything and got into the IT world. Stayed there in that business for 25, 30 years. When I got out, it's that thing where if you're an older person, once you retire, you have to figure out what to do. Everybody goes travel, do this, do that.
Right.
I'm not necessarily the travel person. I got to be up and around and moving and doing things and trying to come up with something. So a few friends of mine said, why don't you start a podcast? It's relatively easy to do. I found somebody to produce it. The music was easy, choosing jazz. I was going to partner with a former radio station that was here, and about 2 weeks after I decided to start the podcast, the radio station went belly up, that being the wave. So it's just me doing the podcast, and it was tough in the beginning to get artists because that whole process has changed. Back when I started, I could pick up the phone, and there were regional offices here in town, CBS, Polydor, Warner Brothers. I could pick up the phone and call somebody and go, hey, I want to get an interview with so-and-so because they're coming to town.
Right.
And it was like, okay, you'll have it in like 3 days. Fine. Now, coming from a computer world and applying it, everybody's got a firewall. And if you have a computer, you probably know what a firewall is. It's basically a stopping point. And if you don't know the people along the firewall, sometimes you don't get responses. So I started with a bunch of local people, Herb Wilborn, Horns and Things, people like that. I used to work at WABQ, and I always laugh when I tell the story. There were two weekenders, Larry Simpson, who became the provost at Berklee College of Music, and John Kellogg, who was the former manager of the OJs, and he was a professor at the Berklee College of Music. So those were two easy interviews, and from their perspective, they gave me different names. And then it began to snowball. My first real national act was a guy named Jakeem Joyner, who's really, really good. But it was like, Darrell, he calls me and he says, Darrell, I got to do a weekend gig let's talk at the beginning of the next week. So he calls me like Tuesday of the next week and go, can we do it Thursday? And I'm like, sure. And we've developed a relationship. And over that time, I've developed a lot of relationships with a lot of different artists. And it's, we have over 10,000 views. Would I like to get 1 million? Who would? We have right now 150 subscribers, which is good. It's a pool I've never swam in.
Right.
So all of this is new to me. So somebody just keeps telling me, just keep going and it will grow. We have listeners in Australia, in England, and a few other places, Canada.
Wow, this is nice.
So it's growing, and it takes, I have to pinch myself every now and then to go, I guess I'm doing pretty good. and we have some other things planned, which I don't want to get into. I tend to be a person that keeps those things to myself. And then when they happen, they're here.
Right.
But we have some interesting things. We have some people involved, yourself, a few other people. And we're just trying to do our thing.
Yes, we are. We're going to make it happen. We're making it happen.
Yes.
And we're going to take our time about it because it's going to be right.
Okay. Yep.
Because I think this is what the people here in Cleveland and around the world, we enjoy good music.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
But there is really no outlet for the jazz players to be able to get their music out because we don't have albums anymore. And how do you know when they're releasing something new?
Right, and that's the unusual thing. That whole, I don't know what I want to call it, that whole situation is totally different now. Before, every Monday and Tuesday, a box would be shipped to the radio station of 25 Earl Klugh CDs or albums.
Yeah.
And you could give them out to people at the radio station because they were chomping at the bit.
Yes, because I was back there.
Right, and then so it was all sorts of things like that, and it was up to those disc jockeys to relay their stories. Well, now since you don't have that media outlet, nobody is telling their stories. If you're not aware of the fact that they all have websites, and their websites is their new marketing tool, so the artists have changed their, I don't want to say philosophy, but now they have to be computer folks. They handle their own marketing. If they're an independent, they handle their own pressing of CDs. They have to control their photography sessions. It's a whole 9 yards. It's a whole different
a big
job. And you got to have a certain amount of money because that's all now coming out of your pocket. But if you still have the record company behind you, it's different. But some people want the control.
Right.
Some people want to, I don't want to put an album out every year. I will put out a single every other month. And at the end of the year, that's when I'll put the CD out. So there's no pressure to make sure that this is done by October 1st.
Okay.
I just got to have one song done. And to hear their stories is interesting. So, and we talk about that. We talk about the streaming thing. Don't get me wrong. I'm trying to wrap my eyes and head and ears around streaming. Don't necessarily enjoy it or like it, but that's the name of the game right now. So we are, Jazz Flight as a podcast is trying to get people more publicity, to be a marketing tool for the artist. When people come out with new music, we put it on the website. We put it in our YouTube channel.
Yes.
And hopefully you listen to it, and we're going to do more stuff like that.
And that's really cool because you've really brought out a lot of different artists, some that I have never heard of before.
Right.
Like, I was listening to Jeanette Harris.
Jeanette Harris.
That young lady is.
Blow. She's very good.
She's hot.
She's very good.
Oh, yes,
very
she
good.
is. I would love to see her come to town.
And I think that's going to happen. A funny story about Jeanette. We got an interview set up. We're getting ready to do it, and we're getting ready to set up the podcast and everything. She had scratched her retina or something.
Oh, dear.
So now she couldn't do it.
Okay.
So I said, I'm easy. So she waited 2 weeks, and we did it. Her music is tremendous. I do believe there's a possibility of a concert featuring her coming to town.
Okay.
But that's an example of a person who nobody knew about.
Yeah, because that song that she did by Curtis Mayfield.
Yeah, right.
Oh, man, Give Me Your Love.
Right.
And Give Me Your Love by Curtis Mayfield was like, it was so instrumental and
Yes.
you can hear everything.
Yeah,
That's the
yeah.
difference of albums
Yes.
versus CD. I think there's a difference. Can you
Well,
explain what is that?
It's back in the day when I was probably halfway through my career. There was a record company called GRP. It was Larry Rosen, and Dave Grusin.
Okay.
And they had George Howard, Spyro Gyra, Chick Corea, and the Electric Band. They had a bunch of, and they were a digital company.
Okay.
So the music was being recorded and pressed differently. The thing now is, because I kid everybody. So you mean to tell me you don't rent like a hotel and have everybody come and stay and then walk over to the studio and you all are in one room? They're like, no. So what happens is, it's my record. Hey, Darrell, I want you to do a track on it. Can you just play something?
Okay.
So you play it,
Right.
and you email it to me. And I sit in my home studio and I mix everything together.
Wow.
So my question is, I'm a touchy-feely person. So I'm like, how do you do that when you don't see that other person there? You know, you can't look over and see that the bass player is really getting into a groove.
Right.
I think of some of the people that I just love to watch. Marcus Miller. When Marcus gets into everything,
Yeah.
he's got this thing going on. There's saxophone players. There's other bass players. You don't have that. You look across the room and you're looking at a monitor that's got some tracks on it. Can you do it over? Well, you can. You can ask that person to do, can you do 4 or 5 takes of that, and you pick the best one. So to me, it's always, I can tell the difference between artists in the studio and artists getting everything sent to them.
Okay.
So, it takes, that's just years of listening to this stuff. One of my favorite guys, I went into a Bose store, and the guy comes over and goes, let me play this for you. And I saw Joe Sample's CD. Joe's one of my favorite people.
Mine's too.
So he plays it. He goes, let me turn it up. I go, you don't need to turn it up. I don't need to hear it loud. I need to hear it comfortable where I can pick out the saxophone, the bass line, and all this sort of stuff. So it's an altogether different thought process now. Some artists say they think it's coming back. They think albums and CDs are coming back. Because one of the things I want to do, I will drop this nugget on you. I want to do listening parties,
Yes.
where I come in with a bunch of different new CDs or whatever, and you listen to it.
Right.
Not sure if the artists have CDs.
Right.
You know, because if they're an independent, then that's something more they have to pay for. So there's a whole lot of negotiating of the waters right now.
You know, technology has really did its thing, but it has also taken away the real, true listening experience
Right.
of a talent
Right.
or artist.
Yeah.
You know, we've just watered things down so much till, I mean, you know, it's taken away the pleasure.
I won't say that we've watered it down. In one respect, it is more economical. Because now I don't have to fly you in, I don't have to put you up in a hotel, the wife doesn't have to cook an extra meal. It's none of that.
Right.
I mean, there are people that stayed at so-and-so's house while they were making the music.
Right.
Now it's just like, I did an interview with Tom Brown, Funkin' for Jamaica, as he says, the only song that people think I ever did. But he talks about the fact that, you know, he's sitting there and there's the music. And that's where he got, you know, do I do this? Do I do this? How do I put this trumpet solo in? How do I put this bass line in? What do you do? You can't do that. But he showed me, took his camera, and he walked around the room. No bigger than this room that we're in right now, but that's his studio. And there's like 1,800 computers in there. So that's how he mixes everything together. So he went from being a non-computer guy to a computer guy. And the other unusual thing about Tom, these are the things I find out. Tom is a pilot for, it's not normal pilot. It's freight.
Okay.
He flies 2 weeks out of the month. The other 2 weeks of the month, he's working on his music. I said, so what happens if that second 2 weeks when you get to a music and you don't get it finished, you got to wait 2 weeks to go back and do it? He's like, yeah. So there's all these, and then you talk to people who are multifaceted. Not only do they produce themselves, but they also produce 1,900 other people. There's a guy named Adam Hawley, guitar player.
Right.
I go, Adam, so how do you manage your time? He goes, Well, sometimes I'm up at 4 o'clock in the morning. I don't get to bed till midnight. Sometimes I'm up at midnight. I don't get to bed till 8 p.m. that night. I'm like, dude, how do you do this? But he's loving it. He has a great time. He's got some new music coming out now, which I can't remember, but it's out now.
Well, I'm just loving what you're doing because not only do we get to listen to the music, but we get to learn and get educated a little bit more about
Right.
the artist himself. So let me ask you, which one of the artists who's your favorite interviewer?
It's not so much the interview. It is.
Or you got the
thing-
most
the-
information?
Well, there's another flute player, Althea Renee.
Okay.
She's very good. She was a cop for, I don't know, I think 5 or 6 years before she became a musician.
And what does she play?
Saxophone. Or no, flute.
Flute, okay.
And I go, so realistically, when you're done with your day job, are you just taking off the uniform and then going into a club? And then what if somebody recognizes you? Who's the fella? She's like, Darrell, we can't go there. I'm like, okay, fine. But there are those stories of, because now, as I call them, everybody's got a side hustle. Everybody, whether it's Randy Scott's a saxophone player, very good, but he also teaches.
Okay.
Gerald Beebe's up in Michigan. He also teaches.
Okay.
So you have people who are teachers. You mentioned Jeanette Harris. She is still an administrative assistant.
Really?
Her funniest story is she lives in California.
Okay.
She was doing something in not LA, on the East Coast. And somebody called her phone, her administrative assistant phone, right before a show.
Okay.
What do you do? What do you do? And then you hear horror stories of, I need to borrow a wireless microphone and you don't get it back. There's all kinds of things that go on. And then everybody seems to be very helpful. I've expressed some ideas about things I'd like to do here in this market. Everybody's on board.
Well, I'm loving it. Now, I know last year we had the opportunity to go see Adrian Crutchfield.
Adrian Crutchfield, yes.
Oh, my goodness. Now, that young man, not only is he fine, but he's hot. I just have to throw that out there, okay?
I can't comment on his fineness. I can't do that.
He is one sexy saxophone player.
Right.
But he told an interesting story.
Kenny G story.
The Kenny G story.
So you find out how I try to ask people how they got started. His parents took him to a Kenny G show. He was 4 or 5 years old.
4 years old.
Sitting in the front. Kenny G's playing, and Kenny G couldn't understand why the parents brought a 4-year-old to the show. Don't get me wrong, I would probably think the same thing.
Okay.
So what happened was Kenny called him up on stage and wound up giving him a saxophone. Hence, that's how Adrian got his saxophone career started. You hear stories about grandmothers, you hear stories about people are not classically trained. They learn by, I was listening to Grover Washington Jr. and just spinning the record, and I just tried to play along with it. I ain't got that kind of mental capability.
See, that's gifted. That's
right.
gifted.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the other thing is that I know that I just lost my train of thought.
I tend to do that to people.
But we have more women that are playing saxophone today that we never had before, or they're coming out. We didn't know about them.
Right.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And so do you see where they have any different
It is
sounds versus the men playing the saxophone?
It's not necessarily a different sound. It's, first of all, saxophone is one of my favorite instruments. I don't play, but I listen. But there are, 18 kinds of saxophones, from the kind that are 6 feet tall. Brittany Atterbury, I was talking to her. In the corner, you can see this saxophone, and it stands about 6 feet high. And I go, and she's all of 5'1". I go, you don't play that. She goes, well, when I do play it, I have to stand on a box. But there's baritone saxophone, and there's not a lot of baritone saxes around, or bass saxophones, or whatever you want to call it. Other than probably the piano, it is probably the most popular instrument there is. And I think that is because of people like David Sanborn, Grover Washington Jr., Najee, Kirk Whalum. They made it very popular. And the
Yes.
sounds that they create is what everybody wants to do. But you still have to work in your style.
Yes.
What is your sound that you are making on the saxophone? I was talking to a gentleman earlier today, Billy Ray Shepherd. What makes your sound different than somebody else? Or, God rest his soul, David Sanborn. David could play two notes and you knew it was a David Sanborn tune.
Exactly.
Grover could play two notes and you knew it was Grover Washington Jr. Where does that come from? And then when you listen to Kirk Whalum, born in Memphis, there's a Memphis sound all to itself. Then he moves to Houston. Well, Houston is the Crusaders and Wilton Felder and Arnett There's a whole... How do you take those two ingredients and mix them into you? And they're great stories. And everything is not, I'll say, cookie cutter. You just play until you think you can do that.
Yeah, because David Sanborn, no, Kenny G. I remember when we were working at the radio station, Kenny G had hit the scene. And he was like, really, I want to say the first person that actually came off the stage and started coming through the audience and going all upstairs and downstairs and playing that saxophone. And that was like really real live entertainment. And behind that, you start seeing more professionals start coming off and engaging the audience with their music instruments.
So one of the coolest things I ever saw was at the Front Row Theater. Great place to see music.
Oh, I wish they would bring the front row back again.
And I can't remember who the headliner, but in the band was Alexander Zonjic on flute, Gary King on bass, Harvey Mason was playing drums, Mark Colby was a saxophone player, and there was a drum solo. Harvey Mason was with Foreplay. His son is a wonderful jazz artist. Harvey played the stage.
Okay.
I mean, literally. Like I'm playing the table, he played the stage.
Wow.
So don't get me wrong. I'm like a little kid because at this particular show, I'm backstage sitting next to Joe Jorgensen, who is the engineer producer of this show. And while Harvey's doing his thing, he turns and looks at me and goes, "It's pretty good, isn't it?" And I'm like, y'all need to stop. Yeah.
Well, Darrell, I want to ask you, so where do you see jazz music heading in the future? And how does Jazz Flight contribute to keeping the genre alive?
I think, number one, there are a lot of younger artists who are carrying the torch. Brittany Atterbury, Reagan Whiteside. Those are just two that I think of off the top of my head. And as long as they continue to make quality music and good music and listenable music, I don't think it's going anywhere, because I don't think the Kenny G, the Grover Washington Jr.'s, the Miles Davis, the Ramsey Lewis, that sound will never go anywhere. You will always remember Sun Goddess.
Yes.
You will always remember just certain tunes that come on and it brightens your soul.
Yeah. It moves you.
And whether it's Jeanette Harris, they're coming along with stuff. Adrian Crutchfield, they're looking for stuff, and the biggest thing is it's got to get out there. If you had to rank the music, it is probably not in the top 10, jazz as a whole. It takes more people, more radio stations. It needs to get popular again. When I was doing Jazz Flight, and I'm not a braggadocious person, it was the number one show Sunday night from 7 to midnight. And the numbers were outrageous.
Yeah, I remember.
It was the front row. There was a show, Bobby Caldwell in Hiroshima.
Oh, yeah.
First of all, my idea, but it sold out, and there wasn't an empty seat in the house. I've been to several concerts lately. There's empty seats. Part of that is due to the fact that the music does not get the publicity that it should. Where we fit in currently, I'm trying to get the artist out there. Here, listen to this.
Right.
Due to certain things, we can't play necessarily the whole song,
Right.
but we give you a taste. But we're working on playing the whole song. We're working on that. So to get that aroma out there, that's what we're doing. We're trying to make it available to everybody. And that's this market. It's not the same in LA and San Antonio or in New York. it's different. So we're trying to make a mark here in town.
Well, with that, I would like for you to let our audience know how can they find you, where can they listen to your show, how can they subscribe.
I'm not giving out my address. I did that the other day, and I'm like, boy, that was a big mistake. Number one, the show, I have a YouTube channel. Don't get me wrong, I can't think of it right now. But I also have a website, which would be www.jazzflight.com. That's where you'll find all the podcasts I've ever done. There are testimonials on there from artists. The ones that, it's funny. Those of you that know me, I can hear my buddy Darrell, you're the most unassuming guy I know. You just try to make it available, try to make people get to it. We're trying to increase our numbers. But in some places, the attention span of humans is about 10 minutes. Our shows are anywhere from 30 to 40 minutes. But I think it's good content. I come up with all the questions, all the silliness. We ask about a ton of different things. Jordan Albright has a pet. It's a dog, but it fits in your hand. That's a pet. I have a dog.
Hey.
Brody doesn't fit in my hands.
No, he took you for a little.
Yeah, he took me for a walk, and I fell the other day. But, so now Gerald and I have this dog connection. He wants to see the dog. For every show, I let people know that if you see somebody walk in here and you see me doing something to my right, it's because I'm playing with the dog. So there's that. There's some other things that we're going to try to do that we're exploring, whether it be listening parties, whether it be concerts, whether they be all kinds of things. A whole bunch of things around the table. You can't do them all at once.
Right.
I got one brain. I'm still trying to flush out some stuff. But, I mean, we're doing the best we can with what we got. And then you can email me at jazzflight@gmail.com. So if you have a question, anything like that, you have suggestions, let me know. I am just the figurehead. I will change ideas in a heartbeat. If you've got a better way of doing something, if you've got somebody you want us to get, let me know. That's jazzflight@gmail.com. That's directly to me.
Awesome, awesome, awesome. So now, that's what's going on. Thanks for watching. Join us every Thursday, and you too can be a guest straight from KAZ Radio Podcast Studio.